Yeah, that's what happens when there's too many external factors involved and people lose the line and the connective thread for the reason why I choose each video within a certain context and playlist that connects them all. Pretty much told you in the title, but as an example, all videos pretty much have multiple reasons why I choose them and have the codes, overlapping codes and symbols and whatnot, which I chose them for that reason so that I could make a visual demonstration of quantum entanglement and expansion upon that. So that in very obvious ways, whether it be symbols like phoenix rising from the ashes or skull and bones, these things that tie into the alchemical cycles in different phases, or very geometric shapes and whatnot. And phase 3 pop-ups, as I was talking about in earlier videos. So those kinds of things are very obvious, or words that became sort of like sayings, and just even if it's just a simple word, that's something that's trackable, traceable, and see how it picks up momentum within society, culture, and different industries. And those very objective things are very easy to sort of tie together and see beyond racial lines and demographics in that sense, and see what actually connects us in thought and concept and what moves our perceptions and society forward, basically. So that's what I was doing with my art practice and have been doing. And in order to do that, I had to at least initially start with videos that I chose for a multitude of reasons, and having to do something with me as well, so that I would be speaking from my own experience, and that would be reflected in what I, pull together, so we can see if there's more or less more legitimacy to it. Because I would, trust the process and speak from your own experience, and it's pretty much all we can really hope for, right? People do. So that's that she knows. And so I chose initially videos for at least 5, kind of like my fifth house stellium or the 5 of wands, building something. And that concept of building architecture and building even a tesseract, sort of building an interstellar space. So all of these things you don't have to necessarily be a expert on in order to see the connective thread and learn something from in a way that makes sense to you or to me, in using this methodology and connective purposes. So yeah, about 5 or 6. And so you can imagine that if you're in a single out one, kind of like the planets, or focusing on one topic in a very simple, like giving them toothaches all over town based on the Clueless reference. Yeah, he said it. He gave you, or you gave him a toothache, and means he thought you were sweet. And the connective thread being anything having to do with sweets or candy. Any video I come across that mentions sweetness, candy, images, visuals. And in that sense, you can get like an experiment kind of thing going, and see what other things tie together. But if that's the purpose of it, and that's the objective, and you're going to be objective, because otherwise, I pick it for a certain reason, and you see all these other connections that have similarities and overlaps because they're all chosen for the same reasons and different codes and whatnot that I picked out. I usually give R.I.P. by Rita Ora as an example, because on the back of her leather jacket there's a phoenix stitched, and that's one identifying factor that I would have pulled out, and had it been when I was tracking and things coming out at that time, I would have added that to one of the phases, as people pick up on different meta trends and concept, and it moves forward and takes on more momentum and whatnot, so you can see for yourself. But those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. And so if all those, within that there's lots, like the car and the pavement, which is a repeating visual, and it's the 3 of Swords, also the tarot. So there's a multitude of reasons, and that's why I picked each video, if I know word this correctly. So it makes sense. And so one way of looking at things is that the other planets or the other wands or the other reasons for picking the videos and codes and connections that are outside of the main reason you're pulling that video into a playlist on a very small scale, trying to, which Andy Warhol also kind of turning something very mundane, like something that anyone could use, and making it iconic in a sense, or giving it more meaning, a conceptual sense, like a soup cans. So, you might think of those extra ones as external factors and those making their own connections. And that video I had talked about earlier, how everything's sort of connected and everything's, but if you miss the point, if you miss the reason for it, the reason for being, the reason for creating it, then you kind of let all those other distractions and connective factors within a playlist, mind you, certain context, take precedence or create confusion. People start blaming me for their own connections that they make outside of the reason I pulled in that video. And for another example, like Bad Blood, Taylor Swift, that was picked for so many reasons. I do the astrology chart and whatnot, and it was really only entitled playlists, the very first one that I picked videos for their title, so that I could experiment and see if AI or shuffle gods could pull together sentences and answer questions in coherent sense, kind of like a precursor to ChatGPT, more mystical and future technological. So, yeah, there's too many external factors in play outside of the focus point or the specific target or goal or whatnot. Then all that chaos arises, and basically you want to use chaos to your advantage as energy, as fuel, and creative chaos. There's always going to be a editing process, some sort of you add and take away, and you question things because that helps in the editing process and comparatively or whatnot, or have new perspective, and that is somewhat chaotic process, and it's very quick in making a collection, but eventually that adds to the final product and the finished collection and the golden idea that has been commercialized and seen and grown in momentum and all these things throughout different industries as it takes on different forms and whatnot, meanings and different contexts, and you can just try to trace it throughout the alchemical cycle and see how far an idea gets, and that's the lead into gold. Or it's so funny, I'm like, did I something like Alien might have picked up on if there was such a thing, which I believe there is, but I need evidence. And it's just the fact that I started with the hybridization and these ideas of systems and data sets and astrological midpoints and for each other, and opposites attract, and sun moon midpoint, which means you were born on a full moon if you have that in your birth chart, which I do, as did Christian Dior. So there's that push-pull energy within one's personality, expression and emotion, and finding balance is the midpoint for anyone, and also within other planets or between other planets. Those brief overlaps that create some sort of spark, I think, is a starting point. So all these kind of terminologies that I would use to talk about these concepts became somewhat of a theme or code in and unto themselves, and it's like, a trend catches on, but it speaks to a phase which encapsulates all these different levels of meaning and are indicators and points of reference to let you know where you are and how to best maneuver, knowing that eventually that phase is going to inevitably turn into the next. And as you pick on those signs and clues that you just start to see like pop-ups everywhere. When I see people wanting more of an individual experience or personalized experience or whatnot, like within even shopping or travel. My mom was travel agent, and just customization, things like that of that nature, maybe like on a digital platform or when I'm not like trying to, you've seen that kind of thing. And so those are indicators of where the market's heading. It starts to seem ever more apparent. That goes back to a quote from it's a dialogue between Socrates and a student, and he's asking if bed changes shape basically at different angles because you're seeing it differently, and the difference is only apparent. Meaning it's only an appearance. The bed didn't actually change shape or form as it moved around the room. Perhaps like shadows or something like that. So you can just I just try to pull these things together, and even if they're not as meaningful or they take on more meaning as you start with more baseline sort of things to pinpoint. And then they become more personal even as they take on more meaning. You start to experience in your own life. And that's kind of the essence of art as experience, is John Dewey's philosophy. And incorporating these things into your life to some degree in a healthy manner. Or reflecting on your own life and sort of learning by doing sense, but it's a whole philosophy, and he's considered America's philosopher. He's founder of my school, so in that sense I pulled that philosophy into my art practice and was able to document and reference back to certain happenings, videos I made that were strange then, and it's like, oh, it's something I want to remember. And then later on, somehow, some way, it takes on a different meaning or new meaning or amplified meaning, and I have that to reference back and see that it's a repeating pattern, and it's, these things sort of take shape and form on their own, but as just thought and energy and fire energy, and that kind of fuels the system, I guess. Grand Air Trinity. There's just a lot of air, and I don't know, just having different insights about my birth chart in particular, but that's what's interesting about astrology and anything that helps you make a distinction, or I guess induces you to make a distinction, or you even have to question whether or not that really applies to you or not. And that slight distinction speaks back to perceptual learning and having to make that slight adjustment with your muscle memory and your fingers position on the strings to what you hear in the orchestra to sort of match your note if it's off. So, and bringing into play all of these sorts of other factors like sound, visuals, reading, listening to the orchestra, listening to your own bow movements, muscle memory, like finger position, just having to go back to the same 4 different positions. Yeah, it's kind of bringing on a different scale, a different level that fifth house stellium and perceptual learning also want to engaging all these areas of your mind at once in activity. So I'm sure there are multiple activities that would do such a thing, but Einstein also has been a recurring sort of reference or interest topic. So, and he played the violin, and I played the violin as well. So that was something that I made like a part of my art practice. explore as far as perceptual learning goes. And that is about epigenetics and genes and genetic codes. And I think on a very simple level, probably with DNA base pairs and my theory of everything, just sort of matching them with music notes and scale and astrological midpoints and Dave, year, and season, and all these sorts of constellations on a very simple level, from macro to micro, and finding the common thread, the 8 octave, and the alchemical cycle. And what moves the universe forward, moves time forward, moves us forward as a species, as a society, as a human being, as a woman, as a artist, what inspires and what pushes and what creates momentum better than something else. That distinction, making sound decisions and having good starting points and having faith in your decision-making process, because you've seen the success and the successive rhythms, the successive patterns be successful and take on their own sort of life in a sense. And no one really knows where a trend starts until, like, it was me. Just kidding. But I did say that I have faith in my process, since it was pretty much in step with my projects leading up to the Valley of Ideas project and experiments therein. So hybridization, combinatory play, and the birds of a feather and karma chameleons, and I was the MIT video and chameleon and the stretching of fabric and taking different light colors and light waves, color changing cars. I had a conversation with a guy way back from Vermont for New Year's Eve last year. I was in New York. So there's so many details, and it all very much is intrinsically entwined with my life and experience, and I feel like that's how I got to the essence of art's experience within that part of my conceptual art practice. And I'd hoped it inspired other people to slow down, just slow down. I even tell myself, because we're all a work in progress. Stop, smell the flowers, I guess, to some degree, in that same phrase, and just find significance in the small moments of our lives and try to remember them. And since I was here alone for like 8 years, you become apparent, seemingly apparent, that it's really only up to you to like kind of remember your time, because no one else was there to really witness it. Whereas when I had a big group of friends and multiple group of friends in New York, it takes on a different feeling of, oh, there's not going to be pictures from anyone else or any shared memories if I don't take notice of my own time, I guess, and make my own memory. It's that quote. I've been referencing the Art of Life Tarot a lot lately. But it's the Gardener's Daughter, and it's the 10 of Cups, and God gave us roses so that we'd have, I think that's how it goes. God made flowers, or gave us roses so that we'd have, God gave us memories so that we'd have flowers in December when it's cold. So I also contradictory sort of nostalgia, just being a hobby for the depressed, or something like that. Yeah, perhaps too. And it's all about balance, though. Like, we learn from our past. I draw from my past with experience and memory and artistic development from scribbles as a child to now, and they all sort of have this sort of prescient quality about them, and that takes time to sort of see I try my best. I want, if anyone were to be following me, I would want them to appreciate it to that level as much as possible as well. So I give some personal references because that's how I made it, is personally drawing from my own, but scientific and personal. It's intersection word from Theory of Everything trailer. There's just this, I guess, natural want to make things have some sort of significance in the sense so that I can live fully my life and remember it, live it fully. And so just, walking through life, so kind of like a zombie. What was I watching? Some sort of sci-fi thing. We're talking about cloning, and they cloned his body, but had not yet transferred his consciousness and memories into the new body, but they activated him or something. And so I'm like, that's perhaps some sort of I guess zombie. They made multiple of them without memories and consciousness. We learn from our memories. We structure our lives based on what we know to be the best way to do things, and that's only based out of experience. And so on a mundane level, art or life is experience. Life is experience. All these things are kind of cheeky in the sense here's kind of it's an Define Conspiracy book by what's his name? He actually studied theology at Baylor University, and Dallas Willard, and just talk about slogans and whatnot, and labels and cliches and things of that nature that we hear over and over again, and sayings. So it's interesting then to track these sorts of both sayings that have been around for a while and see the ones I put forth take on more momentum, or something that kind of naturally, organically comes out of some experience that I have, or some video I made, or something that I've decided or explored, or some mutual, it just kind of works on multiple levels. But to kind of know it, you have to kind of go see the critique of that, and then also from I studied business administration and marketing and consumer sciences and fashion design, so it's based on advertising, and that Andy Warhol and Edie Sedgwick interview on the 1960s talk show. What is art, and what do you see most around you? And that's when pop art really, Warhol kind of reinvented which I don't know if you can ever, you can't really ever really reinvent, but I was saying that I have faith in the alchemical cycle that I chose to work with in the 8 octaves, because I had all these projects lead up in that successive order, and that worked with the chemical cycle. So I saw from firsthand experience, without knowing it, that one project led to the next, and I talked about that in one of my video details. So, anyways, it's just that, since I did draw from my own experience, to make it individual, concept in phase when it's so concept in itself, and the jump, just individual, very straightforward sometimes in that sense, to make it that much easier to explore these more complicated concepts. If you're not looking for some, elusive symbol or something that you'll never see, that's never gonna really take on some sort of, it's not gonna help. It's almost like a concept that guides you within itself, as you start to identify certain because a person would start to identify certain universal codes of the alchemical cycle, as mentioned, like Phoenix rising from the ashes. I think you recognize the time you're in and what's going on around you and what you're experiencing in that the second time and the third time. So tracking trends in that sense and meta trends, and that is all on like every scale, every level, from societal and economic, and seeing where the attention will be focused, all eyes on this or that, because there's just that much emphasis put on it. And even like a movie filmed in Africa, brings people's attention to it, and that kind of things. It was all having to do with fashion forecasting, which I studied in Paris. References on references on references, and that kind of, though, really helps you prepare and train yourself in a sense, guide yourself to know what to look for, to see the significance in things because there is a reference point or another, and that gives it more meaning. That's odd because I saw that with that, obviously very small. And that's all fashion forecasting, and seeing those changes and what makes changes and the distinction between certain things that it's a multi-million-dollar industry, fashion and whatnot. It's about making people want something that they probably already have. So what's that distinction? It's the distinction between one note and another, what you're playing and what the rest of our orchestra is playing. So he said he's a composer also. Conductor, Steve Jobs. Musicians play their instruments, I play the orchestra. It's not so much a master of none, it's actually very focused and very specific, but having the ability to see the overall big picture and see the significance, importance, and know what that's done in the past, how that resulted in the past, and how it came to be then, now. What's going to move it forward? What's going to make someone want to buy the new version of that? Where people's focus is on, natural living or technological gadgets. And that's just through being very observant and able to pick up on things quite easily. What's going on around you, or signage, advertising, people are wearing, referencing. I don't think they even know, but you should, and then you should also know what that's referencing, and that's all, tying things together in a advancement sense of progression, and what moves us forward from beginning to end, that initial big push. Moves us forward, reminds us of what is significant to us, or, as me, but as hypotheticals. I'm tired. But anyways, knowing yourself, life unexamined, not worth living, right? And only then you have a sense of then I think can you only really be in a position that is being honest with yourself as well. Only then I think can you even begin to be objective in assessing someone else's life. That speaks to law and judgment, wake up. As each situation, and this ties into forecasting and predictions, is a multitude of dynamics and scenario factors, and you really would have to break it down into those not just one, but like the repeating factors within factors of repeating scenarios in order to see if there's any sort of prediction. That I talk about this so much, but on a spiritual level, if you get in the way of something that was either designed or set up to happen, or, you know, for whosever agenda it is, either those for what is quote unquote good or bad, but really to say when you take into account that saving the lives of 3 people now might result in the deaths of 30 later down the road, and then that would then take on another level of discernment of who's to say that, and you'd be able to basically hop back and forth from future to past to be able to assess in both what was the best outcome for everyone and butterfly effect on. So really, every scenario is that complicated and that shifting, and even when you think you have, there's always going to be an extra thing thrown in that doesn't exactly match the pattern of typical scenarios that might happen that I would be giving warnings about or whatnot. So like a school shooting or some sort of concert or something like that, earthquake, unpredictable type things. Even beyond forecasting, to really test that in real life experience and on all these scales. And I started small, like I said, with the Value of Ideas Project and Theory of Everything, and just these initial codes and very basic factors, which Shuffle did say was, yes, architecture on a basic level, the architecture of the universe confirmed in one playlist or another. And then saw how these sort of cycles just, and you wonder how much you play into it by acknowledging it as, you know, you start to, I've been seeing that number everywhere, and you're like, because am I looking for it, you know, that kind of thing, or manifesting that. I was in some tarot reader, she's like, have you heard of this book, The Secret? Like, she's like 10 years late, wow, or no more, like 20 years late. That was so cheesy even back then, because it's so simple, and the fact of like there are so many things at play just within our dimension, our reality, and what we're capable of affecting, versus the spiritual realm and different agendas therein. And you get in the way of that, well then everything, a few songs like Gary Styles, like Gravity, I think everything gets in the way, or New Radicals. So, and then you start to question, well, whose agenda is what, and am I getting in the way of good or bad? Which one is it? Because unfortunately, something might be let to happen because, again, later on, if it were to happen, then, or if it were to be stopped, and we would perceive that as a good thing, a good deed, right? You prevented something from happening that hurt someone or something like that. But in the long run, it might have perhaps caused more damage. So does that then mean that that side or that agenda that, you know, interfered initially is good or bad in the very simple sense of good and evil, scales of justice, garden of good and evil? That was also maybe a reference, because gardens being a Marie Antoinette, something simple to wear in the garden of Eden, Garden of Versailles, which is quite breathtaking. And yeah, it was fun to see how people put their own like sort of twist or additions or whatnot on these acknowledged or highlighted concept themes, codes, symbols that, yeah, have to do with a lot of different early sects and cultures. But that was the point. So we see what actually connects us, the connective thread, the connective tissue that enables us to transcend our own walls and boundaries that we've built. Which makes me wonder, did they overhear my idea? And I don't have the right exact terminology or know-how for that, but of border migrants and creating deals with other countries, and it was confirmed with my timing that yes, this would be a good idea if, as long as it's mutually beneficial to both countries, and zones that take in their own and monitored by the United States and paid ways to have their own sort of halfway points of entry that are places they can just self-monitor, self-agriculture perhaps and whatnot. Again, not playing into, but combinatory play. It's just spiraling of that word. Playing the violin, play by ear. Make a play. Phase 3 and has to do with agriculture, the environmental level and societal level. People having farms and these piles and landfills would even be like a sort of where people come together in tribes and whatnot, and there's a sense of experimenting and the beginning of arts and crafts is very contemporary arts and any sort of mechanical engineering. So it's a sort of trial and error stage. And so knowing that, and then knowing what leads into phase 4 and conjunction coming together, conjunctio, and by the way, the entire original alchemical cycle is an acronym, and each phase, the first letter, vitriol. That's why I named mine classic cycle, since it's more in line with where I translate it more so towards fashion and commercials, and in that sense, and multimedia, but really anything along those lines of creative direction and so classic, timeless cycles, but within time. The study of time, knowing that just sort of infinite and illusionary at the same time. And what makes those distinguishing factors, and besides our own timing system and decades and millennia and whatnot, what really distinguishes a movement or a ideology or a way of thinking that moves us as a species forward. In a sense, it's anthropology. And I also was able to trace the recurring actors and musicians throughout campaigns and movies, and for a while I was looking at things that way, so that see if there was any clues or whatnot to tell me what was going on within those movies based on the same actor, like Natalie Portman, Dior, Can't Famous Dior, and Annihilation, or just looked up a lot of different things. It's interesting to see how, you'd have to really know me to follow these things very closely and detailed, but having these points of reference like symbology and tarot and metaphysics and the alchemical cycle, and within my own life and creative sort of likes and things I've drawn, things I've studied, we need to find fill the gaps of what I was a little bit wondering about for a while. Alice in Wonderland through the Looking Glass. And so then it was kind of fascinating seeing how they all sort of, in not as personal or necessarily accurate ways, but in very fundamental factors or fundamental symbolism that a person he chose and picked out of alchemical cycle and tarot and astrology combinations, overlaps, translations that I made with my timing, and learning tarot at the same time and finding alternate meanings through listening to the TV and what would pop out. And again, we are in the Midwest. Anyways, that just, and adjustment, perceptual learning, genetics, progression, advancement for the better, and making those slight adjustments, which is the top piece of the strength card. And it is my birthday, November 26, 11/8. So they are similar adjustment, 8 and less card and 11 and top, and then vice versa in the Rider Waite and other most other decks. The strength and justice card, which then also reflect in my birth chart. So with Aquarius at 11, Jupiter 11, Aquarius, part of the Grand Trine, and just ease of thought makes it simple in a lot of ways, but you make connective thoughts pretty easily, like just gonna make being pretty distracted, but connect the dots pretty easily and see those underlying rhythms, and I do mean that in most literal sense. That's from a quote in one of my Instagram posts. And the data play, Sex and Candy, they're all, there's only about 5 of them, but maybe even more than that. Data plays, I did different rhythms and almost like digital choreography too. I don't know why is this letting me record so long. And then based on, since they're visual metronomes basically, since a deaf child would need to be able to see it visually if they were off in a note, since they wouldn't be able to match or distinguish and match to the rest of the orchestra, hearing wise, probably at least need to be amplified visually to show them if they're to make an adjustment with their fingers. With string instruments, especially, which really relies on that and having a good ear. So it's really on another level what this function has as well, and rhythm and 4 beats, a bar and 8 octave and repeating scale and repeating cycle that is timeless because you can always rely on it. Timeless classics. Essentials. New essentials. The line that I was starting in New York, and just Zoran was the designer by WWT, titled him as, I think. I had to go to the FIT archives, in the library, which is an amazing library. It would be an amazing job to be a curator there, Costume Institute. Since Costume History was literally my favorite class that I took in college, and it was right around the time that Marie Antoinette came out in 2006, and that I went to Paris. Couldn't have been better timing, and I was so excited to be able to name every little weird detail about their clothing, all those very ornate and complicated dresses and skirts, the different way that it changed over time, things that she introduced. She was a trendsetter herself. And and I was just seeing if anything came out of those connections of overlap ideas that kind of both permeate and came about naturally in personal stories and family. My grandma having a sister, just like it's in a way, or double. And there's always this theme of leaving or running, since Eden and the Empress, my family, exile in Switzerland. And I came to America, or leaving one planet and having to find life in another, relocate, displacement, refugees, migrants. We're all migrants here, besides Americans, as far as we know. Yeah. Very first reading where the tarot card was literally pulled from my hand. So I said life, and it flipped over and landed on the upright, propped against the life book that I had propped up against the wall. I was gonna do a page turn from, so I brought it in, and yeah, and right on the life book. Discovering America. Behind the scenes, and yeah, I believe they were actually shipwrecked. Those said, let me know that it was the Swiss. They might have come through Norway as well, which is, I drew in my drawings. Indians, Native Americans, typical ones you see in like children's, animation movies and whatnot, costumes. And Norway written down bottom. And so yeah, costume, knowing history, having to pull that all together, and that adds to forecasting. But I had to go through those archives at FIT to find even clippings from WWD and Zorong, because he's just so obscure and just had this line, very simple and amazing, kind of timeless and chic, sporty, minimalist clothing, and that's always very easy to work with and interchangeable. Easy wardrobe, simple, with great materials, all like word of mouth and lip service. And yeah, he was considered the designer and a lot of skilled clients in Hollywood movies, celebrities and whatnot, buying his clothes and paying a lot of money for very, like, he didn't even have to advertise. It's very successful. And that was pre like social media and none of that either, so I was like very inspired by that concept. Systems and being a very functional, full, utilitarian sense wardrobe of interchangeable clothing and mix and match, that just essentials of timeless classics that kind of work with everything that you can just add to. So that's what I, was always putting forth and proposing, and people invest in me for design. And was starting on